Okay, right. Ancient Egypt, right? Obviously, a place of great romance and mystery, and that is what we shall be talking about tonight. It's quite a in-depth lecture, so try and stay with me on it, but it gets more and more exciting as we go along. So, without the first gentleman I'll show you there, or certainly the first one that we'll come to, we wouldn't be doing this lecture now, because this is Edgar Cayce. He's America's most famous psychic. He was known as the Sleeping Prophet. Okay, and basically what he would do is give medical readings. He would lie down on a couch and he would prescribe remedies for people, and whilst he was in a trance-like state, and this in many ways was the foundation of the modern holistic medicine that we have today. And often when he used to do these readings, he would come out with information relating to the so-called past life of the sitter, or the person, obviously, you know, that was sitting with him in the room. And they would include information about ancient places, like, for instance, ancient Egypt. And what he would tell in this story was that there was a much earlier civilization that had existed in Egypt, one that had originally, according to him, had come from the lost land of Atlantis, okay? And that this had existed for tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years, and that it had succumbed to a catastrophe roughly around 10,500 BC. And that after this time, survivors of Atlantis went to different parts of the world. And one of the places that they went was ancient Egypt, obviously coming into Africa and making their way to Egypt. And what he said was that these survivors of Atlantis created what he referred to as halls of records. There were three of them. One of them was to be found in the jungles of Central America. One of them was in a sunken part of Atlantis off of the island of Bimini in the Bahamas. And the third one, he said, was in Giza in Egypt, where a civilization arose based on the survivors of Atlantis, obviously, and indigenous peoples as well, and also those that were coming in apparently from the Caucasus region and also southeast Turkey, which is a very interesting area which we won't be talking about tonight, but that's where you find these incredible age-old historical sites like Gobekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, which I'll talk to you about the next time. But basically, he said that somewhere beneath the sands of Giza, but somewhere in the vicinity of the Sphinx, and he actually specified an area relating to the right paw of the Sphinx, you will find the entrance to this Hall of Records. Now, what did he say the Hall of Records were? Well, he said that essentially this was a repository of all of the knowledge and wisdom that had been collected by the peoples of Atlantis and that had been brought into Egypt and put there. There was physical artifacts, tablets. He even claimed that there were musical instruments and stuff like that. Now, this is the story that Edgar Cayce told. Now, I'm not saying it's right or not. I'm just telling you what his psychic readings actually said. Now, the fact of the matter is that what Edgar Cayce says is contrary to what we are told conventionally about ancient Egypt. And we'll try and see if we can bring the two together. Because the Sphinx, which is obviously one of the most well-known historical monuments in the world, according to the archaeologists and historians was carved during the reign of a pharaoh called Khafre. Now, he was the builder of the second pyramid. Okay, so in other words, it only dates to about 2500 BC, and this is what you can see here. This is the monument, and the reason why we know that it was built at this time is because there's a nice, what they call a stela, like almost like a tombstone, standing in front of the breast of the Sphinx that mentions the name Khafre. Unfortunately, the context has been lost, so many of my colleagues argue that that's not good enough evidence to suggest that it's of that age and that it's much older. Okay, we'll come on to that. Now, the three main pyramids at Giza were constructed probably between 2600 and 2450 BC conventionally, and they're attributed to the pharaoh Khufu on the right, the Great Pyramid, the Middle Pyramid, Khafre, and the one on the left, which is the third pyramid, to Menkaure. Okay, and of course, this is not what Edgar Cayce says. What Edgar Cayce suggests is that they were constructed probably around 10,390 BC. So there's this disparagement relating to dates. Now, how can we get around this, or what is the real story? Well, let's enter these two people. John Anthony West was an amateur Egyptologist, a tour guide, and a very inspired writer. And he wrote in various of his books that he believed that the Sphinx was far older than what the archaeologists tell us. And he brought in a Boston geologist by the name of Dr. Robert Schoch, who you can see here on the right. And they examined the Sphinx looking for evidence that it could be much older. And Dr. Schoch, knowing how rock weathers, particularly something like limestone, which quite easily weathers, was able to show that the weathering on the side of the so-called Sphinx enclosure has evidence of what they call rain precipitation. In other words, that rain and water has actually carved this weathering, and that it wasn't caused by the wind, which is what the Egyptologists say. So once again, there's this disparagement between what the Egyptologist says and what the other more alternative archaeologists or freethinkers suggest. And I think there is some evidence to suggest that the Sphinx is older, but in all honesty, we don't know how old it is. Schoch and West believed that it did date back to 10,500 BC, and therefore it conformed with the ideas of Edgar Cayce. But we'll leave it there. But also, my colleagues Robert Bouval and Graham Hancock came up with further evidence of activity around 10,500 BC on the plateau. The Sphinx itself faces towards the east, and this is the exact area of the sky where, at the time of the spring equinox, the constellation, the zodiacal constellation that rises just before the sun, is noted as the bringer of the age in which any particular population lives. Well, today we're at the edge of the age of Aquarius. We've just lived within the age of Pisces for the last 2,000 years. But the Sphinx itself is quite obviously a lion. And the last time that the constellation of Leo rose due east, just before the sun at the time of the spring equinox, which is exactly where the Sphinx faces, would have been around 10,500 BC. So that is also cited as evidence that the Sphinx is much older than conventional thinking. So with all of this, there have been a number of searches in the vicinity of the Sphinx looking for the Hall of Records, okay? And these began as early as 1957, not long after the death of Edgar Cayce himself. And all of these searches have been funded by the Edgar Cayce Foundation, particularly under their name of the Association for research and enlightenment, which is like their research wing. And they have under their, under their wing, two archaeologists that have worked for them. One of them is Dr. Zahi Hawass, which we'll be talking about. He's an Egyptologist. He's always in the news. If ever you see a show on ancient Egypt about things being discovered, he'll be there, I promise you. And the other one is Dr. Mark Lerner, an American archaeologist. And both of these have got links to the ARE. Okay, it's not sinister or anything like that, but they were both fostered by them in their early years and helped along their course within the universities. And so, almost as a thank you for that, they have got involved with a number of these Edgar Cayce Foundation projects, the last of which actually took place in 2008, where they actually put angled drills down the right paw of the Sphinx, and they did actually come across a cavity. But unfortunately, it was full of water because the water table is so close to the surface there, and also it was full of sand as well. And the most obvious answer to this is that it's a natural fissure in the rock, and that the water has been, coming along and has ended up in that chamber or that cavity, bringing with it sand. But it is hoped that there is possibly something down there that could be man-made. I mean, there are other chambers within the Sphinx itself, but they're quite small and they don't really go anywhere. But anyway, so this is the search that's been going on since the 1950s. I am not aware of anything that's been gone on there in the last 15 years. But the fact that there could be something at Giza to be discovered is not in doubt. I mean, the actual ancient name of Giza was Rostal, which means the mouth of the passages, or if you want it in other words, the opening into the caves, suggesting that there is some kind of underworld existing beneath the plateau, and that this may have had some kind of symbolic purpose to the ancient Egyptians. Perhaps the underworld was seen as where the souls pass through in death before they rise up into the sky, and we'll be talking about stars in a minute. But there are various other accounts from Roman times, from Arab chroniclers, that do also talk about something underneath the Giza plateau, some kind of memory of a lost civilization that existed in this area in the past. By the way, this image here, for instance, is from something called the Book of the Duat. So that actually shows an area of the underworld known as Rostal, which is the actual name of Giza, which many people have suggested, resembles a pyramid or some kind of island on which Giza originally rested, and therefore could be a clue to the fact that this is a memory of what went on there in the past and has been preserved within their books of the dead. Now, as I mentioned, there is possibly a clue as to where to look for the entrance to the Hall of Records within the alignments to do with the stars at Giza. Now, many of you will have heard of the so-called Orion correlation theory that was first put forward by my colleague Robert Bouval in a book called The Orion Mystery in the early part of the 1990s. And basically what this posited was that the three belt stars of the constellation of Orion overlay the peaks of the pyramids. It was a very popular concept. The book was a bestseller in many parts of the world. And it's still, as far as stars are concerned and their connection with the pyramids, still probably the most popular theory. However, there is another one, and that is that the wing stars of a constellation by the name of Cygnus, which is also known as the Northern Cross, which is obviously in the northern part of the sky, and was a celestial bird in many different parts of the world, including Egypt, actually align with the three peaks of the pyramid. And in fact, they actually align better than those of Orion. Okay, so when I first put out this theory, which came from my colleague, the engineer Rodney Hale, in the mid-1990s, and it featured, mid-2000s, and featured in my book, the Cygnus mystery, I immediately came into conflict with Robert Bouval, and there are literally dozens of pages online of us debating which stars do reflect the peaks of the pyramids. And I believe that I did win the day on that for various reasons, but I'll tell you why. But what he said, and this was very important, he said context. You know, he can show why Orion might be linked with the stars, which we'll go into, but tell me why you think that Cygnus should overlay with the stars. Well, before we do that, I'll point out that it's not simply a case of just overlaying 3 stars on 3 pyramids with Cygnus. It works not only from an overhead projection, but from a horizontal projection as well, because there is a certain point that you can stand near the plateau where you will see the same 3 stars actually set down perfectly into their same pyramids, okay? And this is essentially what happens, basically. And those 3 stars, which you can see here now, reflect exactly the ones that are overlaid on the peaks of the pyramids. And what this tells us, therefore, is that the whole thing is in 3 dimension. And that's something that Orion can never do, because the way that the Orion stars set is they all set down one after each other at exactly the same spot. So you will never, ever be able to see the 3 stars of Orion set down into their respective pyramids, okay? Now, the position where you can see these 3 stars of Cygnus, the 3 winged stars of Cygnus, setting down into the pyramids, there is a mound, one of the only mounds in the whole of the area, and this is the contours that show the exact spot. And in this area, there were buildings at the time of the Pharaoh Khufu. In fact, the actual village or city where the people lived, where they would go each day to work on the building of the Great Pyramid, is in this area. And right in the centre of it is this mound, which would have made an absolute perfect place for people to have stood to watch and observe these stars setting down into the 3 pyramids. And on old maps, it has a name. It's called Busiris. And what this means is the place of the god Osiris. And this is very, very important, because every pharaoh in death becomes the god Osiris. During life, they are the god Horus, but as soon as they die, they take on the form of the god of the dead, or the god who is dead, and his name is Osiris. Okay? And Osiris was said to have his own tomb, and that was located roughly in the area of Busiris. And I find that far too much of a coincidence to be ignored. And it is said that Osiris rests in his tomb in what's known as the Shetiet in Rostau. That's just the name of the tomb itself in Rostau. So Rostau, again, is the name of Giza. And so this tells us that we're in exactly the right area. And this story about Osiris and about the pharaoh becoming Osiris is incredibly important to tell us why these particular stars are significant, not only for Cygnus, but also for Orion. Because around 2350, that's about 100 years after the finishing of the 3rd pyramid on Giza Plateau, the pyramids that they started building began to contain what's known as pyramid texts. Now, these are spells and sayings and the magic of what the pharaoh has to go through in death as he passes through the underworld, which is known as the Duat, before he comes out of the Duat and rises up into the sky and goes to the 3 stars of Orion. So Orion is very important, don't get me wrong. But what happens is that Orion is like the brother of the pharaoh in death. His name is Sah, S-A-H, later Sahu. And in the pyramid text, it says it greets Osiris as his brother. So they greet, but then what happens is that pharaoh, that dead pharaoh, as Osiris still, then enters onto the Milky Way, which is known as the Winding Waterway, and carries on to the north. Doesn't stop at Orion, carries on to the north, okay? And is embraced by his mother, his cosmic mother. Her name is Nuet, but we'll come on to her. And he is then taken into the womb of his cosmic mother and is reborn into the second life, the afterlife. And that afterlife is amongst the stars of the northern sky. And he also becomes one of the so-called circumpolar stars, one of the stars that never set, okay? And as I say, they're the stars that revolve around the so-called celestial pole, okay? So that he's reborn. And that's what a pyramid is all about. Yes, it is a tomb, but it's more than a tomb. I call it an ascension machine. It was the way to quite literally project the soul or the spirit into the afterlife. And possibly even they believed that the body itself would disappear and go up into the stars, because each of the tombs were originally hermetically sealed. And the interior of a pyramid actually represents the womb of the goddess Nuet. Okay. Now, the goddess Nuet is generally seen as a sky goddess. In other words, the whole of the sky. But she's far, far more than that, because she's a projection of the Milky Way itself. You see the way that the Milky Way arches like that? Well, that's exactly the way that Nuet is projected. She's shown as this naked lady that arches over the earth. And what's significant is that she represents every part of the Milky Way as seen in the northern hemisphere, but the area of her womb is the constellation of Cygnus. This is where the pharaoh gains this second life, this afterlife, and goes into the hinterland. And that's very, very significant. And that's the reason why, that's the context of why the pyramids were aligned to Cygnus very specifically. And here's an image of Nuet with her arms in exactly the position of the actual shape of the constellation of Cygnus there. Now, the three pyramids are aligned to the three wing stars of Cygnus, which you can see here. Pyramids 1, the Great Pyramid, the Second Pyramid, the Third Pyramid. But there is one star that's missing from this as far as a location on the plateau itself, and that's Deneb. That's the brightest star in the constellation of Cygnus. So at one point, somebody said to me, well, surely there should be something marking that. I said, well, I'm not sure if there is. He said, well, maybe it's underground. And this got me thinking. I thought, is it possible that this marks the entrance into the Hall of Records? Okay. So I started focusing my attentions on the plateau with the idea that we may be able to find the entrance into this Hall of Records. Okay. And I began working very closely with a gentleman by the name of Nigel Skinner Simpson, who's here tonight. Where's Nigel? Where is he? Is he gone? Oh, there he is. Right. Okay. So he can authenticate all of this. And I have to get this right because he's one of the best Egyptological researchers in the world. What he doesn't know about the Giza Plateau is not worth knowing about, in all honesty. And we've discussed all of this, and we started to realize that there was a possibility that there was something in the area of what we called the Deneb spot. So we spent time, surveying is probably not the right word, but looking over every part of the plateau, trying to see if we could work out exactly where we were. And the Deneb spot, we came to realize, was actually marked by what's known as a mastaba. Now, a mastaba is like an early form of pyramid. It's a flat-topped, huge tomb-like structure. You can see this is it here. And these were built essentially before the pyramids, but they still continue to be used for officials and priests and other members, maybe of the royal family, right up to the time of Khufu. Okay, and the one that was marking the Deneb spot was what's known as Lepsius 14, named after the great German archaeologist Karl Lepsius that did a lot of work on the plateau. So this was it. But what could we do with this? Well, what we also discovered at this time was that in the same area as this mastaba, Colonel Howard Weiss, who had done a lot of work on the plateau with an engineer by the name of John Perrin in the mid-19th century, had entered into this very peculiar tomb where they found a number of bird mummies. Okay, and this was talked about in 1837 within a book, but there was no specifics there as to where it was. But John Perrin did a map that actually shows where this site was, which we began to refer to as the Tomb of the Birds. And you can see here the Great Pyramid, the Second Pyramid, the Third Pyramid, the Sphinx is up there. You can see Lepsius 14 marked there. And just at the base of his map, of John Perrin's map, there is a little area there where there's a few little rectangles that are marked excavated tombs and pits of bird mummies. So we had it. So we had where this, and because the oldest god of Egypt is a god called Soker, S-O-K-E-R, we felt that, and he's an underworld god, a god who was venerated in underworld places, that maybe, just maybe, this was the entrance to some kind of cave underworld that would eventually lead to the Hall of Records. So we searched and we actually found that the Tomb of the Birds still existed. There it is on a Google Earth map. But we looked at the time and there was nothing online or anywhere else about this tomb. Nothing. You'd think that there were whole reports and everything about what had been found. Nothing whatsoever. There's Lepsius 14 there, so obviously not very far away from it, and that's the second pyramid right at the bottom right. So what could you do? Go there, obviously. So this is what the Tomb of the Birds looks like from the outside, and I went inside with my ex-wife Sue in January 2007, and we explored the interior. Now, it should be pointed out that it's in total darkness, all right? So, you know, the only thing that you could do is use a torch or a camera to try and light it up and find out what was going on. There are various, like these wall slots, which quite clearly is where the mummies of birds had been placed. And we searched, but we couldn't find anything, okay? So we came home saying, well, clearly that's not the entrance into any kind of cave world. But then in May 2007, so that's just a few months later, the memoirs of the British diplomat Henry Salt, who was the consul general of Egypt at the time, were published. Now, he worked with an Italian explorer by the name of Giovanni Battista Caviglia to do what we'd call excavations today. I mean, obviously it was a lot more cack-handed with dynamite and a few other things, and you know they would just cart things off to whatever country that paid the highest price. But they were trying to record what they were doing as well. And these memoirs referred to the fact that both Salt and Caviglia entered caves west of the Great Pyramid and travelled for a distance of several hundred yards before coming upon a spacious chamber linking with three others of equal size. The entrance was marked QQ on Salt's plan of the plateau, which you can see to the left. And what's interesting is that the commentators and the editors of these memoirs got it wrong as to where this was. They saw it as somewhere else on the northern part of the plateau, in an area which Nigel says they've got it wrong. But it was up to us to try and find out exactly where the entrance into this cave system was. And Nigel managed to do it painstakingly, looking at every single reference in these memoirs, and realised it could only really be one location, and that was the Tomb of the Birds itself. In other words, we'd missed something when we first went there. So we had to go back. And with a little bit of funding from the Edgar Cayce Foundation, who were aware now of what we were up to, we were able to go back in March 2008. And realizing that this time we could really be going into caves, we had a load of equipment with us. You couldn't just simply go through the normal entrances, carrying a whole load of stuff. It just, you know, you'd have been flagged up immediately. But there was a way of getting on the plateau at the time where nobody would check you at all. And that was if you came in on a camel right from the southern part of the plateau. And there was nobody there to check you. So because you picked up the camel in the local village, you went round the back and you came in for the entrance. So we realised that was the way to do it. And we weren't doing anything illegal, by the way. We had our tickets to get in. We paid all of that. So I want to point all this out. So there's us, you know, on the way towards the Tomb of the Birds. And we searched. Again, let's point out that this is in total darkness. So, you know, we searched and looked, and this time we did find the entrance. And this is the moment of discovery. That makes sense to our knowledge of the bird cult. It's very, very big. Not sure how old it is. I'm now switching to night vision. Interesting aroma in here. Bats, guana. This is the way that it comes in. More side chambers here. Here. And in here they found lots of mummified birds. Wow. Here's the rest of your Tomb of the Birds.
Wow! Oh my God! That's amazing!
So, that's the first of two videos that you'll see. So that is us finding it for the first time. Now, how we missed it the first time, I don't know. But anyway, just bear with us. This is the entrance. It was just a crack in the wall that had clearly been sealed up at some point, but reopened again at some point after that. So this is what we entered. This was the entry into the Giza cave world that nobody had seen for 150 years, or certainly no expert, as you'll come to see. There's Nigel on the left. That's the entrance into the north-south running passageway. There's me exploring another passageway in the northwestern part in the middle. And you can see just how huge this is. And the first chamber has clearly been cut to represent a rectangle. In other words, this is the natural cave system that's been pushed out for use. And quite clearly we know that it was used for, for bird mummies and whatever. What else, we just don't know. So, of course, we had to start exploring. And this is me, beginning to go down the north-south passage. You can see that this is purely natural, basically. Notice how red the rock is. This is highly unusual for the plateau. And this is what's known as ochre, which is a very ferrous iron material that oozes out of rock. And I think this could have been incredibly symbolic, because these caves must have been there for tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years. And the whole route was strewn with huge rocks that had fallen down from the ceiling. You could very easily just break your legs, in the total darkness. Let's point this out. And even the lights that you took, it was so thick with powdered bat guano that you could hardly see much in front of you. And it took a long time to navigate these. There's Sue in the passageway. You can see the blackness. By the way, that's not the blackness from torches. That's manganese, which you find inside caves. As I say, emphasising that it's pitch black, basically. And the other thing is, this is a habitat for some quite dangerous creatures. Basically, it was full of thousands of bats. Okay, and also spiders, poisonous spiders, white widows. Okay. And that's aside from all of the huge bugs like something out of an Indiana Jones film, I promise you. So, because this is a natural place, this is a natural cave system. And for that reason, when we went back, certainly the second, third and fourth time, we realised we'd have to cover up, basically. That's me inside there with masks, cover my head, cover my hands, everything. Now, let's emphasise that these are natural. They are created by what's known as the pluvial action, which is water coming through the fissures in the rock, carving out caves over, as I said, not just tens of thousands, but possibly hundreds of thousands of years. Now, at certain points, the walls have been chamfered. I mean, it's very irregular where this happens, but clearly that's done by human hands. You can see it there. You can see the marks. But also, it's in sort of side chambers here where there's almost no reason for this to happen, suggesting that it's not simply been done for practical purpose, that there's some symbolic reasoning behind this as well. A mummy, we found one in there, which I picked up and put straight back down, but it's so small that I've no idea. It could even be a mouse or a rat, that was mummified and given as an offering to this bird god. We don't know, but it was incredibly light. But this prompts the question, obviously, is what else did you find? Any ancient Egyptian artifacts? No, we didn't, not one, okay? It was completely bare, no hieroglyphs or anything. So the cave is prehistoric in origin. It's probably used in dynastic times as a bird and animal necropolis. Prehistoric archaeology expected. I mean, one archaeologist said to me that you could find that there's evidence of human activity going down here for, for tens, if not hundreds of thousands of years. Okay, and just weird anomalies. Above Sue's head there is what I've always considered to be a face. And I look at this, and although it's almost certainly natural, you can see the eyes, you can see the nose, you can see the jawline there, and you can see a headdress. And for some reason, to me, this almost has a sort of, Indian sort of Vedic feel to it, which I don't know. It may have meaning, maybe just our imagination. And right at the end of it, we'd reached a distance probably of about 120 meters, which took a long time to get there. There is what we refer to as the tube. And Sue was willing to just crawl through it and get into the next level. But this was the end of our fourth journey there. And I said, no, it's time now for us to report what we've discovered and, come back at some later date. So we never did go through the tube. Plus, when I looked in there was whole loads of big bugs and stuff like that. I thought, I'm not going in there. But she was willing to go there. So we finally did that 4 times. That was the sort of state that I came out of it after it. I mean, obviously it doesn't do your suit any good whatsoever. And this was the plan that we did of it, where you can see the tomb of the birds there, the whole length of where we went. And we're going to have a break now. Is that about the right time for a break? Yeah, I've got the thumbs up, because I will tell you what happens next, which is when we reveal what has happened to Zahi Hawass himself. So it all starts getting completely out of hand.